I want to introduce Tricia Alach, who joined our team in putting the conference together several months ago. Tricia is from New Zealand. She'll tell you more about her background, which includes work in 3 continents and 4 different countries, and the experiences involved in them. And she also has a wonderful blog about work-life balance, has been focused on this issue for quite a long time. She will have some wonderful things for you to say about the cultural differences that we deal with and how we can handle them best, I think. So, Tricia, you are nearby. There you are. Let's give a round of applause for Tricia Alach.
So, yeah, as John said, I have worked around the world for the past 12 years. I'm originally from New Zealand, and then my husband and I took ourselves off to the Netherlands, then to the UK, and eventually, by kind of accident rather than design, we ended up in the US. But my fascination with work began a long time ago. And rather like Jerome K. Jerome, I like work. It fascinates me and I can watch it for hours. So I began as an academic trying to understand this kind of fundamental question: why do people work? And if I'm really honest, it's because personally I couldn't see the appeal. You know, I understood that you had to work, you had to have money, you had to buy things and, you know, be a responsible adult. But as a first choice in terms of how you spent your time, I didn't really get it. So I did what academics do, and I turned my personal fascination into a thesis topic. And I started to talk to people who didn't work conventionally. So I spoke to women who chose to temp. I spoke to lots of people who had very kind of unconventional career paths, if you like. And what I realized fairly early on, so I was asking the wrong question. The question that I needed to explore was not why do people work, it was why do people do anything? And start from an understanding of why do people do anything, and then figure out where work fit into their decisions and the way that they choose to prioritise and use their time. So off I went, I spoke to a lot of people, you know, why do you work? Why have you chosen to work in this way? What's important to you? And what I came to realise is that culture is really the key to understanding why people do anything, and that includes why they work. So what I want to kind of make the case for today is that if we want to make a cultural change in the US to valuing work less and valuing leisure more, because I think you need to do both, it's not either or, we really need to address this issue at the cultural level. And businesses will adapt. Businesses are, in a sense, amoral, if you like. They will reflect the values of the culture in which they operate. And we know this for a fact because American corporations that operate in other countries reflect those cultural norms. So if we can get the cultural change at the kind of social level, I think that you'll see that businesses will just do, you know, whatever they have to continue to do business in that environment. Another point that I want to make, particularly because I'm going to talk a lot about my time in the Netherlands, which is sometimes, I think, promoted as a kind of Eurotopia, is that Eurotopia hasn't always existed. Eurotopia has only been there for maybe 50 years. For much of history, Europe was a fairly horrible place to live and an even worse place to work, especially if you were poor. So change evolves. It comes about for a variety of reasons, but there's no reason to think that it won't happen here. You know, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a whole bunch of things happening in order to kind of evolve you along that path. So John and I have these fantastic discussions where we debate whether or not policy or culture is more important in terms of bringing about change. And I think of it as, the chicken and the egg kind of question. What do you need? Do you need the political framework and the legislation so that people change their behaviour, or do you need the behaviour to change and then, the policy kind of catches up with it? And my view is that you need both, but by the time you get to the legislation and the policy, that's really the codification of culture. It's already, those values, they're already accepted in society, they're already taken for granted, they're already considered normal, by the vast majority of people. And so the legislation kind of sits neatly on the top, and it becomes a kind of codification of that. I don't think it creates change. And so I think it's very important to focus on both, but it's also really important not to feel like you can't achieve anything if you don't have the legislative change. Businesses operate in large part in ways that are not mandated by law. So even though there are some laws governing how businesses operate in terms of leave and sick leave and how many hours a person can be expected to work, the vast majority of things that go on in businesses are actually cultural. And I'll give you a couple of examples that reflect different values, I think, in different societies. So when I first went to work in the Netherlands, I worked for a business school, and I was the head of the executive education team, and our job was to go out and partner with organisations who wanted to develop their leaders. So mostly we were working at board level, very, very senior executives, and the companies were looking to spend quite a lot of money, So I came from New Zealand, which is similar in lots of ways to the US, in the sense that, we think we're quite business focused, and we think we should be all about action points and return on investment. And so I would kind of rock up to these meetings, introduce myself as quickly as possible, and try to get on with the order of business, the substance of the discussion. And become very quickly, unstuck, because no one was interested in getting on with business. They wanted to know about me. So the questions would begin. Hello, are you married? Do you have children? Do you plan to have children? What brought you to the Netherlands? What does your husband do? And, the first few times I was like, what's going on here? Am I being sexually harassed? Because often, board level, even in the Netherlands, all men and me, and I thought, this is really weird, and in New Zealand this would not happen. And then after a few times of kind of going through this process and observing my colleagues and how they introduce themselves and the way that they always introduce themselves as a person, I realised I'm not being sexually harassed. I'm being interacted with as a human, as a person, as somebody who brings more to this, metaphorical and literal table than some skills and experience and some value-added service I can provide. I actually bring myself. So I kind of got over myself a little bit, and I kind of eased into it, and I even kind of got to the point where I could handle all the kissing. And 3 kisses when you start and when you leave, allow extra time. So I kind of got used to that, and I was like, okay, I can handle this. So I go in, I do the kisses, I introduce myself, we spend some time, getting to know each other as people, and then we get on to business, right? Not necessarily, because in the Netherlands, their definition of equality means everybody gets a say. And that includes deciding the agenda. And you do it in the room. So you go around, you do the introduction, Then you go round again and everyone says what they want to kind of do in the meeting. And by this stage, the meeting's kind of over. And so you agree that you're going to meet again in a few weeks. And you leave, and I think, oh my God, what a terrible meeting, we didn't get anything done. And you say to your Dutch colleagues, how do you think that went? And they say, oh, I thought we had a very nice discussion. And they are totally happy. And the client is totally happy. Because for the Dutch, the good discussion is the point, right? And, this is where you start to see some of these cultural differences. So the Dutch have a completely different perception of time. Now, I should say at this point that I am going to apologise because I'm going to make a lot of generalisations about national cultures. And of course, no national culture is completely homogenous. There are always dissenters and countercultures, and the people in this room probably represent that in terms of the US. But the dominant culture is kind of what you see enacted in day-to-day life, and it's what kind of counts for the most part as right and proper. So the Dutch are much more concerned about the process of something, that everybody kind of gets a say, and because they're not all that concerned about getting things done quickly, they will never sacrifice that for something as pathetic as an outcome or some, kind of sense of productivity. Now, in between the Netherlands and the US, I went to the UK, which of course has a completely different culture as well. But I kind of understood that it's 10 minutes of small talk at the beginning, and then you can get on with it, and there's no kissing. So that was fine. Now, when I landed in the US, I decided that I would focus on doing some volunteering work because we were only going to be here for a few years, and I didn't want to sort of put the work in to establish my business here, only to go again. And I thought, well, this is a great way I can kind of have a bit of a sabbatical. I can have some experience, do some community work, and it'll be fun. So one of the first places I decided to volunteer was with Paws. It's an animal charity. And the person I spoke to said, yeah, that would be great, but you need to come and have an orientation, and then you have to do the training. And she said, but you've missed the orientation, but you can come up and I'll give you like a one-on-one orientation, and then you can do the training, and then you can be a volunteer. So I thought, okay, that's cool. So I went up to Linwood, and this is my first kind of work meeting in the US, and walked in and said, hello, I'm Tricia, I'm here for the orientation. She said, okay. We sat down, and she just went. Like, there was no preamble, there was no how was your journey, there was no nothing. And I thought, okay, this is a bit odd, but remember, I used to be a lecturer in the business school at Auckland, so I was like, oh my God, this is what I used to read about, American work culture, task first, relationship, a distant second. So I thought, this is kind of exciting, I'm seeing it in action, so I went with it, and I was like, it's fine. But when I got home, I was looking on the website, and the website has the profiles of all the people that work there. And so I found this woman's profile, and I read, a bit about her background, because I was curious, I wanted to know her a bit as a person. And right at the bottom, it had a question: where's the place in the world you would most like to travel? And she had written New Zealand. And it floored me. I thought, how can you have someone in your office, one-on-one, for half an hour, who comes from the country in the world you most want to visit, and you don't mention it? And that's when I thought, okay, this is a completely different environment to the one that I'm used to, and I need to really kind of get my head around that. So, why am I telling you these stories? I'm telling you these stories because these are examples of what I would call artifacts in a cultural sense. And artifacts within a cultural framework are the parts of the society that you can see, but what they reflect are the very, very deeply held values and assumptions that that society has about the point of life, what has value, and what people do the world over is they do what makes them feel valued as a human being. What's interesting, of course, is that what's valued differs from society to society. So when we look at the differences in behaviour between the Netherlands, between Denmark, and between the US, what we're seeing is that top level, the artefacts. If we dig a little bit deeper, we start to see what are the differences in terms of the values that those societies hold. And that's where I think you really start to understand why it is that these countries in Europe and other parts of the world have no problem having holidays and time off. And an example came through from a friend of mine in the Netherlands this morning. Her children had been sent home from school because it was too hot to work. It's 23 degrees, it's like early 70s. But the temperature is not important, it's the value. So that school went, do you know what? Your health is more important than you being here. And so they sent them home. Those kids internalised that lesson, and then those are the values that they take into society as adults. And believe me, in the Netherlands, if it's too hot to work in the business world, you go home. If you're too tired to work, you go home. If you've got a bit of a headache, as I often did, you will be sent home by your manager with a stern lecture on how your health is much more important and everything else can wait. So these are fundamental values that really shape the day-to-day interactions that you have. So I put this little kind of Facebook meme up because I really liked it. You know, this is Denmark. Denmark has free healthcare and free college, the minimum wage and the 35-hour week, and they're the happiest country in the world. You know, we should be like Denmark. And the implication is that if we had free healthcare and college and, you know, this great employment legislation in America, we would be happy. I'm going to say I don't think that's true. I think that if you cut and paste the legislation from Denmark onto America right now without making the cultural change, Americans wouldn't do anything differently. They would still continue to work and live in the way that is culturally appropriate, even if they had the legislation. So that's the level at which I think we really need to focus our individual efforts in terms of making change. Another point I wanted to make is this kind of quote from Aristotle: "Give me a child until he is 7 and I'll show you the man." And a number of people have kind of talked about American children and how the lives of American children are very different to the lives of children in other countries. And if you think about where you get your ideas about what's normal, you know, and how you are a good person and how you have a good life, that's embedded at a very young age. So if you're a child who has only ever known a really busy scheduled life, where every second of your life is spent being productive or doing something in the service of productivity, you know, you are playing sport because it's going to, you know, give you something to write on your college application. You're volunteering in the community because it shows you to be a well-rounded person. You know, if everything that you do and every second of your life is productive, that's what you think good people do. So to then turn around and say, you know, to those people when they're adults, hey, chill out, take some time off, you've really got to kind of unwire the brain and try and rewire it in a different way. So, you know, another great example, this time from Denmark, is and I think maybe the Michael Moore film will show more of this, is in Danish schools they teach empathy, and they have a class on it every week from age 6 to age 16. The kids get together, they sit in a circle, somebody brings a cake, and they talk about, what's going on in their lives and, what the problems are. So if someone's being bullied, they'll talk about that, and then the group comes up with solutions. And the teacher has some input, but they are not the authority. The group helps solve these problems. Now, if you think about that, so not only are those children kind of being taught empathy is important, but they're also learning a process through which they can actually understand other people's points of view and, come up with solutions. And to me, it then makes sense that those children, when they grow up, they'll vote for politicians who want to introduce policies for the social good, even if they might personally not benefit from them. And it also shows that when they go into a work environment, they actually have this more kind of empathic view towards their colleagues. So I think, if we want to understand, and I don't know if anyone studied this, it would be fascinating if we looked at 6-year-olds in different countries and how they behave, and asked them about what's normal and, what does a good person do. And then we looked at what adults in that society do, how much of that kind of early learning is actually creating, some of the challenges that we're trying to address in the adult population. So this is not a new idea. I'd love to say I came up with it, but there's Plato thousands of years ago saying, what is honoured in a culture will be cultivated there. So assumptions about the purpose of life underpin all human activity. And this is a huge topic, which I'm not going to get into. I'm just going to kind of hone in on one kind of question that has vexed philosophers for eternity, and it's the question about the essence of humanity. And the question is, are we here to work? Are humans essentially workers, or are humans essentially here to play? When are we most ourselves? And how you answer that question dictates everything else that actually happens in your life. And my observation is that the answer to that question kind of exists on a continuum. So you have some countries, I would say the US is one of them, where there's very much a sense that human is worker. So if you have the sense that the human is essentially a worker and that the best use of a human's time is to be productive, because that's natural, that's what they want to be doing, that's when they are most themselves, you organise society in that way. So you prioritise productivity. And then, of course, that provides a moral justification for organising the other institutions to support that. So you prioritise the interests of business, and you don't want anything to kind of get in the way of that productivity. So, so the argument goes, you don't impose any limits in terms of how long people can work. It also means that when you want to kind of bring in certain economic ideologies, a kind of neoliberal economic ideology, on top of that, the groundwork's kind of already laid. So if you are saying, essentially we're all workers, what we want to do is work, and the market provides the best means in order to do that, it provides a kind of moral justification for organising a society in that way. Now, if you are in one of those societies, and I would say, the European societies to a greater or lesser extent, greater in the Nordic states and in Southern Europe, lesser for sure in the UK, you're not convinced that the essential nature of a human being is to work. And so you don't prioritise that. You don't prioritise productivity in everything. You prioritise other things. And we see this through some of the concepts that exist in these other countries that don't have a translation into English. So in Holland, we have this concept, gezellig, and it means cozy. And the point of life in Holland is to have as many gezellig moments as you possibly can. In Denmark, they have one, I think it's pronounced heiki or huki, and it's the same sort of thing, and these are moments where you're sitting around having a hot chocolate in front of the fire or, enjoying dinner with your friends. You're being as happily unproductive as possible. And you're not doing it, and an earlier speaker made the point, we talk a lot about doing things in the service of productivity, meditating so that we can be more productive, taking vacation so we can be more productive. In these societies, they don't do it so they'll be more productive. They do it for its own sake, leisure for its own sake. And they do it because it has value. And to them, that's how you live a good life. So in the US, it's about not just kind of we need to work less, we need to work less, we need to work less. We also need to appreciate and value these leisure activities more and for their own sake. So, I'm going to apologise again because I'm going to kind of give you some of my observations around what the challenges are in the US in the cultural sense. And I am co-facilitating a workshop tomorrow. I'm going to talk more about the workplace in particular, business cultures. But today I just kind of want to share with you some of my observations from being an outsider in your society. So one of the things that I was actually told about by a friend of mine who spent some of her teenage years in the US is that Americans don't really value leisure for its own sake. So in the way that we would talk about, leisure as kind of hanging out and doing nothing, Americans have leisure activities. So, it's very focused. It's goal-oriented. Leisure is goal-oriented. And as, a couple of people have said already, being busy is a status symbol. Being productive is the most important thing. And I think here, people take that productivity bias into their personal lives. So, even when people are, working hard at work, they choose to be productive in their non-work hours as well. Productivity is kind of the thing. And most US arguments for taking leisure are linked to increasing productivity. So, even some of the people like Ariana Huffington, who have, I think, done a lot to kind of raise the profile of this issue, are primarily talking about the importance of sleeping and, spending time with your family and downtime, because it means that when you eventually get back to the office, you will then be more productive. So it's still, leisure in the service of productivity. Job success as the ultimate lifetime achievement, in terms of what I've observed in my travels, that's a uniquely American thing. It's linked to identity. It gives you status. It gives you purpose. It's seen as the path to happiness, as well as providing material wealth and financial security. And that just isn't the case in other countries. So, in other countries, you have a job, you may or may not like it, you may or may not like your colleagues, but your identity comes from multiple sources. And, this includes, being a member of a family or, being involved in certain elements of the community, or just, kind of being who you are without any need to kind of prove your worth through what you produce. So in those societies, the job has less value to the person, if you like, in the sense that it isn't the kind of be-all and end-all of their existence. But when you place that much importance on job success, you also start to see how the lives of, children leading towards that, everything starts to be geared in that direction. So, if you truly believe that job success is the most important thing, then you will direct your effort towards that, even if it means that you have to start very, very young and you have to create very, very busy lives so that these children can prove that not only are they well-rounded individuals, but they've also got a really good work ethic. You know, you will do that, and those values will be propagated, those kids will internalise it, that will be normal, and then they will do the same thing for their kids. And so the culture gains strength, and, you know, we're all carriers of culture. So what we do, how we behave, how we talk about things, this reinforces this for the next generation. I was super excited when I found out that we were coming to Seattle because I'd heard about the Seattle cafe culture. And, you know, I love cafes. And then I got here and I was so disappointed because cafes in Seattle are workplaces by another name. And it's really depressing to go into a cafe thinking that you're kind of going to hang out and enjoy the buzz and, you know, eavesdrop on conversations, which I call ethnographic research, and and only to discover that every person in the cafe is on their own, on their laptop, with their noise-cancelling earphones in. It's like the open plan office I left in London. But, you know, when productivity is so important to a society, of course you're going to choose to be productive, you know, even if it's 8 o'clock on a Saturday night or 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. And then this is the one I think is the biggie, and I'm really, really interested to hear, you know, how other people would address this. Being American is kind of synonymous with working all the time. You know, this new Samsung ad, I don't know if you've seen it, but, you know, it's like, America, you know, you work so hard and you're always multitasking and you win at everything. You know, it's kind of your thing. You know, you work harder, you achieve more. That's the American identity. And if you stop doing it, you know, what would you do instead? You know, what would replace that cultural narrative? God forbid you become French or Dutch or Danish, or, you know, those narratives are owned by other countries. So how could you recreate or create a new, you know, identity for America if you hold on to this idea that your thing, the thing that you really are better at than anyone else in the world, is working harder? You have to let that go. And I don't think the solution is to, like, win at leisure. So, you know, just to kind of wrap up, change, I think, is to keep working on the legislative side, but just to remember that's, you know, the kind of codification of it. When you get those laws passed, you'll know you've won. You've done it already. Americans are really good at leisure. Mind your language. And we all do. My husband and I noticed that we started doing it since we moved here. You know, he'll come home and he'll say to me, "Have you had a productive day?" Meaning, how was your day? And if I say no, that means I didn't have a good day. It means I had a bad day. It was unproductive. It must have been bad. So pay attention to the language that you use. Use the power of social networks to create a new normal. So I read this fantastic book called Connected about the power of social networks, and it turns out that we can influence our friends' just by changing our behaviour. So, you know, when you're on Facebook, put pictures of yourself enjoying, you know, what I'm calling moments of pleasure, just enjoying leisure, you know, pleasurable leisure. Maybe it's another PD example. And it doesn't have to be grand undertakings. You know, you don't have to go off on a 6-month backpacking trip. You could just have a long lunch with somebody. You know, you could just sit in the park. You could just enjoy your garden, you know, rather than feeling that you have to be working on it. Just kind of start to do those things and then share them so that they become normal over time. And then in the workplace, I know there's often a sense that there's nothing we can do about workplace culture because it's all pervasive and, you know, evil HR is watching us and wanting to fire us at a moment's notice. But we actually all have quite a lot of autonomy in terms of how we interact with people in the workplace. So, look at the way that you behave with people, how you run meetings. When you greet somebody, do you spend some time just kind of chatting to them as a person? And are there ways that you could be less time pressured and more relational in your interactions? And then, of course, if you're in any position of authority, role modelling those leisure-valuing behaviours. So, announcing you're off to have lunch with your friend, and you don't want to be disturbed for 2 hours, or, talking about how much you're looking forward to your vacation, normalising those things, making them aspirational, and, showing that you can have a successful professional life, but you can also value these other things. It doesn't mean that you're not committed or that you're a bad worker. Great. So, let's open it up to some questions or comments.